Imagine for a second the sheer physical and, I guess, mental toll of standing at the helm of a really massive, sprawling enterprise.
Oh, yeah. It's exhausting.
Right. Like you've spent years navigating just the absolute unmitigated chaos of the growth phase.
The era where the floorboards are practically shaking.
Exactly. The floorboards are shaking from the momentum. You've steered the ship through these crazy market storms. You've hired armies of new talent, stabilized the revenue, and now you look around at this empire you helped build, and you decide, it is finally time to step down.
Which is a huge moment.
It is, and the natural impulse, like the culturally accepted narrative for an executive at that level, is to just hand over the keys, right? Throw a lavish retirement dinner, take the golden parachute, and vanish to a coastline somewhere.
Yeah, just completely disappear.
But instead of that sudden vanishing act, you choose to spend a year and a half executing this meticulous, almost military-grade exit strategy. Like you sit in the room day after day, intentionally engineering your own obsolescence.
I mean, that kind of departure requires a level of emotional regulation that we rarely see in high-stakes leadership.
Yeah, because it's usually all about ego. Right?
Exactly. The psychology of stepping down is usually just so fraught with ego. We're conditioned to associate our identity with our utility. So if I'm not the one making the decisions, who am I?
Right.
And we expect sudden handovers because, frankly, ripping the bandage off is just emotionally easier for the person leaving.
Oh, for sure.
But a prolonged 18-month departure, that demands that a leader watch their own influence slowly wane. They have to watch someone else sit in their chair, sometimes making decisions they wouldn't personally make, and they just have to remain silent.
It's deliberate,
Yeah.
it's slow, and it's an absolute masterclass in detachment.
And that deliberate detachment is exactly what we are dissecting today in this deep dive.
Yeah, it's a fascinating blueprint.
It really is. We're exploring this blueprint on leadership, corporate culture, and life transitions, and it's all drawn from a remarkably candid interview with the former CEO of Elm. Right. And for context for the listener, Elm is a major digital and tech company that experienced explosive, paradigm-shifting growth during his tenure.
Huge growth. So we're going to unpack his highly unconventional approaches to everything, really. Organizational management, dismantling corporate bureaucracy.
The exacting precision required to maintain an actual work-life balance.
Yes. And the architecture of leaving a legacy without letting your ego just, tear down the scaffolding on your way out.
Because the underlying architecture of this entire philosophy is what makes it so universally applicable. I mean, we're looking at a corporate case study, certainly, but the mechanics of this leader's decision-making process are fundamentally rooted in human psychology.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about what happens to you when your own daily routine, whether you're running a household or pivoting to a new career or selling a small business, when that routine suddenly vanishes.
It's terrifying.
It is. How do you structure a sprawling organization so it doesn't lose its agility? And simultaneously, how do you structure your own mind so you don't lose your sense of purpose when the calendar suddenly goes blank?
Right.
So these principles, they operate on both the macro-organizational level and the micro-personal level.
So to really understand the way he ran the company, we actually have to start at the very end of his career journey, right?
That makes sense.
Because his mindset about leaving the building kind of frames the way he operated while he was inside it.
Totally.
So the CEO began planning his exit back in 2019. He had targeted his mid-50s as the ideal window for retirement.
A pretty young retirement, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. But then 2020 arrives, the COVID-19 pandemic completely upends the global market, and simultaneously, his company is navigating the immensely complex process of an IPO.
Wow, talk about bad timing.
Right. So he delays the exit to 2021 or 2022.
And I mean, delaying the exit was a strategic necessity, but it also signals a very specific philosophy about executive responsibility.
How so?
Well, you do not unten the bridge during a global crisis. And you certainly don't introduce leadership volatility during an initial public offering.
Oh, the market would hate that.
Exactly.
Yep.
The market demands stability, and the employees demand continuity. So by anchoring himself to the company through that turbulence, he prioritized the structural integrity of the organization over his own personal timeline.
He put the company first.
Yeah. And it established a foundation of trust for what would come next.
And what came next was that 18-month runway. So he spent a year and a half working in tandem with the board of directors to, groom his successor.
Right.
But the most revealing part of this transition is what he called the shadow period.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
It's so good.
Yeah.
So for his final 3 months, he and his successor, Mohammed, occupied the exact same leadership space. They worked side by side every single day.
That sounds incredibly awkward.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But they instituted one golden, unbreakable rule to govern their interactions. Any decision that would impact the company's immediate present, within those final 3 months, the outgoing CEO could weigh in on.
Okay, that makes sense.
But any decision whose impact would materialize after those 3 months,
Yeah.
that was entirely, unequivocally the successor's domain.
Wow.
The outgoing CEO had to completely step back.
Let's examine the mechanics of that golden rule because it solves one of the most persistent problems in executive transitions.
The backseat driving.
Yeah, the lame duck syndrome paired with backseat driving. In a standard transition, the outgoing leader often makes long-term commitments on their way out the door, and that basically shackles the new leader to a strategy they didn't even design.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare for the new guy.
It is. By bifurcating the decision-making based on the timeline of impact, the outgoing CEO acts as a safety net for the present, but refuses to be a crutch for the future.
Right.
I mean, imagine sitting in a product development meeting, possessing decades of industry intuition, and watching the new CEO approve a launch timeline for 6 months out that you think is completely flawed.
I would physically cringe.
Right. Biting your tongue in that moment requires suppressing every instinct that made you a successful executive in the first place.
It really forces the organization's center of gravity to shift naturally, while those structural supports are still technically in place.
Exactly. It's the ultimate test of leaving your ego at the door.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the discipline doesn't stop once he officially hands over the badge.
No, not at all.
The day after the safety net is gone, he implements this highly specific 4-pillar framework to manage his own retirement. And it is incredibly pragmatic.
Let's hear it.
Okay, rule number 1, financial independence. He argues you have to calculate your actual unique burn rate, not some generalized wealth target, but an intimate understanding of your exact expenses.
That's super practical.
Yeah. Rule number 2, owning your time. The entire objective of stepping down is to achieve total autonomy over your calendar.
Right, no one telling you what to do.
Rule number 3, following your passion. You need a proactive understanding of what you actually want to pursue rather than a reactive desire just to, stop working.
Those first 3 rules are really foundational. I mean, they address the material, the temporal, and the directional needs of a human being in transition.
Yeah.
But the architecture of a successful post-career life usually crumbles because people fail to understand the 4th rule.
And I'm still turning this 4th rule over in my head. He calls it the paradox of being busy.
Such a great concept.
His argument is that in retirement, you must artificially manufacture busyness.
Right.
You have to invent tasks, projects, or structured routines, provided they don't violate your autonomy from rule number 2.
Which sounds weird at first.
It does.
Yeah.
And to explain this, he uses an analogy from the academic world. He compares the landscape of retirement to the process of getting a PhD.
Oh, yeah. This is a brilliant comparison.
When you're writing a doctoral thesis, you are entirely untethered. You don't have a manager checking your deliverables at 9:00 a.m.
No quarterly performance reviews.
Exactly. If you do not rigidly, almost ruthlessly structure your own days, time simply evaporates.
It just disappears.
You can spend 3 weeks falling down a research rabbit hole, opening 50 browser tabs, exploring theoretical angles, and at the end of the month, you have produced absolutely nothing.
Because the freedom becomes paralyzing.
Yes. And he argues that retirement operates on the exact same frequency. Without a structured daily grind, the actual currency of your time loses all its value.
It's a really profound observation about the human perception of scarcity.
What do you mean?
Well, we do not value abundant resources. We only perceive the preciousness of a resource when it is finite or restricted.
Okay, it's true.
If you wake up on a Tuesday with an infinite expanse of completely unallocated time stretching out before you, an individual hour holds absolutely no weight. It becomes fundamentally worthless.
Because there's always another hour.
Right. But by artificially restricting your availability, by, committing to local boards or leaning into structured hobbies or setting rigid personal deadlines, you reintroduce a sense of scarcity. You give your remaining free hours their sweetness back.
I'm struggling with rule 4 a bit, though.
Why is that?
Well, the man just spent decades operating inside a high-stakes pressure cooker environment.
Oh, absolutely.
The whole narrative of retirement is liberation from the grind. So why artificially recreate the very stress he just spent 18 months meticulously engineering his way out of? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of stepping down entirely?
I see what you're saying, but the distinction lies between stress and momentum.
Okay.
He isn't suggesting you recreate the anxiety of corporate leadership. He's suggesting you maintain the velocity of a structured life.
Velocity, not anxiety.
Yes. Think of a deep-sea diver surfacing from the ocean floor. If they rocket straight to the surface to escape the pressure, what happens?
They get the bends?
Right, they suffer from decompression sickness. Nitrogen bubbles form in their bloodstream, and the shock to their system can literally be lethal.
Wow.
They have to make structured decompression stops. The transition from a highly demanding career to total idleness is basically psychological decompression sickness.
That's such a vivid way to put it.
You're operating in what we might call the fog of work. Your neurology is completely wired to handle immediate crises, complex interpersonal dynamics, and a constant influx of data.
So when you suddenly halt,
Your brain doesn't just embrace the peace, it goes into withdrawal. You might impulsively launch a new business just to feel relevant, or you might spiral into anxiety, assuming your decision to leave was a catastrophic mistake, simply because the sudden quiet feels deeply unnatural. You need months to decompress.
that perfectly explains why he admitted to using complex corporate project management software to organize his personal life and his smart home.
Oh my God, yes.
His kids were apparently relentlessly making fun of him for it.
I mean, of course they were.
It's the classic trope, right? You can take the CEO out of the tech company, but you can't take the tech company out of the CEO.
Exactly.
He was building his own decompression stops. He needed the scaffolding of project management to keep his brain from getting the bends while the fog lifted.
It's a highly effective coping mechanism, and it serves as a brilliant lens through which to view his tenure as a leader, really.
How so?
Well, if he applies this level of exacting precision to the management of his time when he has zero external obligations, we can extrapolate how he managed his calendar when he was responsible for thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue.
Oh, absolutely. And the sources outline his operational calendar in exacting detail, which actually brings us to the brutal math of work-life balance.
A topic everyone struggles with.
Because we just established the psychological danger of an empty calendar, let's look at his philosophy on a completely full one. His daily schedule at Elm was treated as immutable.
Immutable.
Yes, set in stone. She arrived at 8:30 a.m., and he exited the building between 5:30 and 6 p.m.
Huh.
Every single day. And the moment he crossed the threshold of his home, the disconnection was absolute. He instituted a hard rule against checking emails or engaging in corporate correspondence during his evening hours.
I mean, in the ecosystem of hypergrowth technology companies, that kind of boundary is treated as almost heretical.
Oh, for sure.
The cultural expectation of the modern executive is perpetual availability. The smartphone tethered the leader to the crisis, blurring the lines until the workday never truly ends.
Yeah, you're always on call.
For a CEO to draw a hard line in the sand at 6:00 p.m. requires immense confidence in the systems he built to run without his immediate oversight.
It's a radical departure from the Silicon Valley mythos. He's essentially treating his energy like a finite, non-renewable currency.
Which it is.
Right. And he actively sacrificed weekday social events to maintain this boundary. He noted that during the work week, he rarely engaged in anything social after evening prayers.
So strictly family time.
Exactly. His weeknights were fiercely protected and dedicated entirely to his immediate family. Weekends were then allocated for extended family and social obligations.
It's a very clear compartmentalization.
I love thinking about this through the geometry of a triangle. Imagine the 3 points of the triangle are career, family, and friends.
Okay, I can picture that.
The brutal, uncomfortable truth of adult life is that you only possess enough energetic bandwidth to fully illuminate 2 of those corners at any given moment.
You really can't have it all the time.
You cannot. The CEO looked at that triangle and made a deliberate, unapologetic choice. From Monday to Friday, he poured his energy into career and family, and he completely intentionally dimmed the friends corner until Saturday morning.
It's a total rejection of the modern myth of absolute balance. True balance isn't allocating equal percentages of your day to every aspect of your life. It is making intentional, sequential trade-offs.
Yeah.
And this framework informed his intense critique of the culture of overwork. The CEO harbored a deep, deep disdain for the badge of honor that managers attempt to wear when they brag about grinding at the office until 10:00 p.m.
Oh, the hustle culture.
Right. He did not view the late-night manager as a dedicated hero. He viewed them as a walking red flag.
He practically considered it a symptom of systemic failure.
Yes.
He argued that if a manager is consistently burning the midnight oil, it points to one of 3 catastrophic breakdowns in their leadership.
Let's break those down.
Number 1, a complete inability to delegate tasks, meaning they're hoarding the workload due to a lack of trust.
Yep.
Number 2, a lack of capable staff, meaning they have failed at hiring or training and are compensating by doing the work themselves.
Also a major issue.
Or number 3, a fundamental failure to prioritize, meaning they treat every minor hiccup as an existential crisis.
He is aggressively dismantling the illusion of inefficiency masquerading as
It
dedication.
really is an illusion.
It is. Human cognitive endurance is strictly limited. He points out the biological reality that a person sitting at a desk for 12 hours is rarely executing 12 hours of deep strategic work.
Mostly they're just staring at a screen.
They usually possess 3 to 4 hours of peak cognitive output. The remaining 8 hours are lost to shallow tasks. Writing meandering 20-line emails that could have been 3 sentences, or scrolling through internal dashboards, or trapped in loaded, poorly structured meetings.
We've all been in those meetings.
But it's vital to understand that his rigid 8.30 to 5.30 doctrine wasn't universally applied without context.
Oh, right, there were caveats.
He introduced 2 highly nuanced caveats to this rule: the phase of the organization and the phase of the individual's life.
Let's unpack the organizational phase first, because he acknowledges the reality of beginnings.
Yeah.
If you are launching a startup, or if your department is initiating a massive company-defining project, the 6.00 p.m. rule temporarily vanishes.
You have to push hard.
You are going to burn the midnight oil because the sheer friction of getting something off the ground requires an asymmetrical input of energy.
Absolutely.
But his insight is about duration. If a company continues to rely on that bleeding edge, crisis-level pressure months or years after a product is stabilized, that company is hiding a deep systemic flaw.
It's a Band-Aid.
Right. The leadership is covering up structural cracks like chronic understaffing or broken operational pipelines with the raw suffering and burnout of their employees. Crisis mode is a tool. It cannot become the culture.
And that leads directly to his second caveat, which deals with the phase of the individual's life. This is a highly pragmatic, if slightly uncomfortable, truth about career trajectories.
Uncomfortable how?
Well, he posits that during your 20s, your work-life geometry is naturally and perhaps rightfully skewed heavily toward the career corner of the triangle.
Because the friction of your personal life is generally lower. You likely haven't started a family, you have fewer heavy financial or domestic burdens, and honestly, biologically, your raw stamina and energy recovery rates are at their absolute peak.
Precisely. The 20s are an era of aggressive accumulation. By investing a disproportionate amount of your time into the work during that specific decade, you are compounding your career capital.
You're building the foundation.
You are accelerating your learning curve, building your network, and establishing the foundational competence that will dictate your trajectory. However, the critical pivot occurs as you age.
Right, you can't hustle forever.
As your familial commitments deepen and your energy reserves change, the geometry must shift. You cannot drag the relentless 20-something hustle into your 40s without catastrophic consequences, usually resulting in the fracturing of your health or your family.
I've seen that happen so many times.
As a professional matures, balance shifts from sheer hours logged to the high leverage quality of the decisions made within a protected time frame.
The collateral damage of trying to outwork your own biology is just massive.
It really is.
But, okay, this brings us to a massive operational contradiction.
Lay on me.
If you are the CEO and you are actively commanding your workforce to go home at 6:00 p.m. while simultaneously demanding an explosive 50% year-over-year growth rate, the math doesn't seem to add up.
It sounds impossible.
How does a sprawling enterprise double in size and revenue if the entire workforce unplugs before dinner?
That tension is the central paradox of scaling a business. The only mathematical way to achieve asymmetrical growth without asymmetrical hours is to ruthlessly eliminate operational friction.
Meaning what?
You have to ensure that the 8 hours your employees are in the building are entirely devoid of bureaucratic drag.
Which means we need to talk about his war on red tape and his self-appointed title of Chief Broom Officer.
I love that title.
So good. Elm was experiencing a terrifying velocity of growth. We are talking about adding 50% more staff in a single calendar year, expanding from 400 to 600 employees in the blink of an eye.
That is a staggering rate of hiring.
To manage that influx without extending the workday, the CEO adopted a philosophy famously championed by Jack Welch. He viewed his paramount responsibility not just as the visionary architect of the company, but as the chief broom officer.
Hence the name.
His primary function was to walk the floors, identify the bureaucratic sludge that naturally accumulates in a growing company, and sweep it out the door.
The metaphor of the broom is incredibly apt because bureaucracy is rarely instituted with malicious intent.
It's usually an accident, right?
Yeah, it's an accidental, creeping byproduct of risk aversion. When a company is small, trust is high, and speed is paramount. But as you add hundreds of new employees, mistakes inevitably happen.
Someone messes up an invoice or ships the wrong code.
Exactly. And to prevent those mistakes from recurring, middle management creates new compliance protocols. They add an extra layer of review, an additional mandatory meeting, a secondary signature requirement.
Just to cover the bases.
Right. And each individual rule seems entirely rational in a vacuum. But in aggregate, they form a web of red tape that slows the organization's reflexes to an absolute crawl. The CEO identified a highly specific inflection point where this transition occurs, the 200-employee threshold.
The breakdown of intimacy.
Yes.
He noted that once an organization expands past 200 individuals, the fundamental sociology of the culture shifts.
It changes completely.
When you have 100 or 150 people, the leadership team still possesses the human bandwidth to recognize faces, know names, and understand the general emotional weather of the office. You're operating on interpersonal trust.
You literally know everyone.
But human cognition has a hard limit. Once you cross that 200-person line, that intimacy shatters. You can no longer rely on personal relationships to ensure quality. You are forced to rely on structural systems.
And that vacuum of trust is where the bureaucracy takes root and begins to choke the life out of the company.
To counteract that suffocating growth of red tape, he implemented structural teardowns, beginning with highly visible, symbolic actions that carried profound psychological weight.
Like the glass door.
Yes, the physical manifestation of transparency. This is one of the most striking operational anecdotes from his tenure.
It's a great story.
So the CEO is constantly broadcasting the virtues of an open-door policy, urging his employees to embrace transparency and approach leadership without hesitation.
As most CEOs do.
Right, they all say it. But one day, he steps back and looks at the entrance to his own executive suite. He is staring at a massive, heavy, solid wooden door.
Not very open.
Not at all. The physical architecture of his office is in direct, glaring contradiction to the cultural values he is demanding of his staff. A heavy wooden door signals hierarchy, exclusion, and secrecy.
So what does he do?
He orders the maintenance team to physically rip the wooden door off its hinges and replace it entirely with a sheet of transparent glass.
That is a power move.
Now, any engineer, salesperson, or intern walking down the hall could literally see the CEO at work. They could see if he was pacing, if he was engaged in a deep conversation, or if he was just answering emails.
And while it might masquerade as a minor aesthetic adjustment, the psychological ripple effect of removing that physical barrier is seismic.
Oh, I bet.
It strips away the intimidating mystique of the executive suite. It forces an alignment between the physical environment and the stated corporate doctrine. And more importantly, it establishes an unavoidable precedent.
Lead by example.
Exactly. If the CEO of a massive tech company cannot hide behind a solid wooden door, every mid-level manager and department head in the building suddenly feels the intense atmospheric pressure to remain equally visible and accessible. It is leading through environmental design.
But, environmental design only changes the optics. It doesn't change the underlying mechanics.
No, it doesn't.
To do that, they built an anti-bureaucracy inbox.
I love this idea.
This was a dedicated, heavily monitored internal system specifically engineered for frontline employees to report operational bottlenecks.
So they could just complain directly to the top.
Essentially, yeah. Imagine a project manager who is trying to launch a critical software update, but they are paralyzed because getting approval to hire a crucial developer takes 8 weeks, or requisitioning a new server requires a 6-week procurement dance.
Classic corporate drag.
They flag this process in the inbox. The executive team would then forensically analyze that specific bottleneck. Their explicit, uncompromising mandate was to redesign every single operational process until it required only one signature of approval.
Wow. We need to pause and deeply examine the mechanics of a single signature mandate because it represents a complete paradigm shift in corporate governance.
How so?
Most large enterprises operate on a permission-based culture. If you need to make a purchase, you need approval from your manager, the finance department, and the legal team.
Right, you need 5 signatures.
And if the purchase turns out to be a disaster, no single individual is held accountable because the responsibility was diluted across 5 different signatures. It is a system designed to protect careers, not to execute efficiently.
Everyone just points the finger at everyone else.
Exactly. By reducing the requirement to one signature, you transition the company to an audit-based culture. You are handing one person the total authority to act immediately, but you are pairing that authority with absolute, inescapable accountability on the back end.
It completely eliminates the ability to hide in the crowd.
It really does.
And to truly weaponize that speed, they took this philosophy of decentralized authority to its absolute extreme. They looked at their sprawling, 100-strong workforce and decided to shatter it into autonomous micro-organizations.
The startup pods.
The startup pods. The mandate was strict. No pod could contain more than 40 employees, and many were intentionally kept as small as 10 or 15 individuals.
That's tiny for a huge company.
It is. But these were not just isolated software development teams waiting for instructions from on high. These pods were granted full end-to-end autonomy.
Like many companies.
Exactly. A 15-person team would handle the ideation, the product development, the quality assurance testing, the operational rollout, and even the direct sales to the client.
That is incredible.
The strategic vision was to fuse the desperate hunger, agility, and hypercommunication of a tiny garage startup with the massive financial runway and market reputation of a giant corporation.
Which is the theoretical holy grail of organizational design. You are attempting to build an ecosystem of highly adaptive, independent organisms rather than a monolithic, slow-moving beast.
But here is where the reality of that design seems terrifying to me.
The chaos.
Yeah. If you take a massive publicly traded company and shatter it into dozens of autonomous 15-person pods running their own playbooks, how do you prevent total unmitigated chaos?
It's a valid concern.
Don't you completely lose control of the brand? Doesn't it devolve into a scenario where the right hand is building a product that completely cannibalizes the left hand's market share?
That exact fear, the terror of losing uniformity, is the engine that drives traditional top-down bureaucracy. Executives cling to control to ensure a unified front.
Which makes sense on paper.
It does. But the CEO's approach relies on the mechanism of scalable trust. He recognized a fundamental trade-off.
Right.
Yes, by relinquishing microcontrol to a localized 15-person pod, you absolutely sacrifice a degree of strict uniformity.
Right.
The branding of a specific feature might deviate slightly, the internal coding architecture might vary between pods, and there will inevitably be some duplicated effort. But the currency you gain in exchange for that lost uniformity is macro speed.
You trade perfection for velocity.
Exactly. You immunize the company against becoming a slow, uncompetitive dinosaur. The CEO's underlying thesis is that internal friction and localized chaos are not the true existential threats to a large enterprise.
Okay, if chaos isn't the threat, what is?
The fatal threat is institutional arrogance.
Institutional arrogance.
Yes. It is the deeply held assumption that the strategies and products that made you wildly successful in the past will automatically guarantee your relevance in the future.
Ah, resting on your laurels.
Right. When a centralized executive team tries to control every variable, they inadvertently stifle the peripheral innovation that keeps the company alive. The startup pod structure operates like a decentralized nervous system. It ensures that the company is constantly running dozens of simultaneous experiments on the edges of the market, touching the actual pulse of the consumer, rather than waiting for an out-of-touch directive to be handed down from a centralized boardroom.
So we've physically torn down the wooden doors, we've shifted from a permission culture to an audit culture, and we've built these autonomous, highly agile speedboats.
We've built the machine.
But an organizational structure, no matter how elegantly designed, is fundamentally just a collection of human beings.
And humans are complicated.
They really are. How did this leader evaluate, maintain, and correct the human capital operating inside those autonomous pods?
That is the million-dollar question.
That brings us to the complexities of hiring, firing, and the psychological warfare of corporate grading systems.
This is where his philosophy shifts from structural engineering to profound psychological pragmatism. The eternal debate in human resources, especially during periods of rapid scaling, is the prioritization of traits during the hiring process.
Right, the classic competence versus culture fit debate.
Exactly. Do you index heavily on a candidate's cultural fit, ensuring they blend seamlessly into the existing social fabric? Or do you prioritize raw, unadulterated
The
competence?
CEO's stance was unequivocal. Competence reigns supreme.
Which is kind of controversial nowadays.
It is. He built his hiring pipelines to index heavily on capability over cultural harmony, but he instituted one massive, non-negotiable exception to that rule: ethics. His theory was that if you hire a remarkably brilliant engineer or a top-tier salesperson who happens to be overly aggressive or fiercely competitive traits that might clash with a highly collaborative culture, the sheer gravity of a strong, established corporate culture will usually grind down their rough edges over time.
They'll learn to play nice.
They will adapt to the prevailing social norms. However, if you hire a highly competent individual who is ethically compromised, what he explicitly labeled a bad apple, they must be excised from the organization immediately.
Because the damage inflicted by a highly competent bad actor is exponential, not linear.
Wow, that's a great point.
An incompetent bad actor will simply fail to do their job and eventually be discovered. But a highly competent bad actor will actively rot the barrel.
They know how to game the system.
Yes. They possess the intelligence to figure out how to manipulate the audit-based systems you've set up. They weaponize office politics. They destroy interpersonal trust within their pod. And most dangerously, they set a silent precedent.
What kind of precedent?
If leadership tolerates an ethical breach simply because the employee hits their quarterly targets, it sends a broadcast to the entire company that toxic behavior is implicitly rewarded as long as it produces revenue.
Which just breeds more toxic behavior.
Exactly. You can teach a new coding language, you cannot teach a moral compass. Ethics are a prerequisite for entry.
The clarity on ethics makes perfect sense, but his philosophy regarding standard incompetence is where things get genuinely surprising.
His firing protocol.
Yeah, his protocol for removing underperforming employees is a fascinating blend of rigid accountability and deep institutional empathy.
It's very unique.
If an employee receives a 1 out of 5 in their annual performance review, they are not summarily marched out of the building by security. They are placed on a structured 6-month improvement plan.
Which is fairly standard.
It is, but the critical defining step in this process is what happens right before the plan begins. The CEO operated on the deeply held belief that when an employee is failing, the root cause is not automatically the employee's lack of capability.
That perspective requires an immense suspension of ego on the part of leadership,
Seriously.
because it implies that the systems the leadership built might be the cause of the failure.
Exactly. Before HR would ever process a termination, the company would physically uproot that failing employee and drop them into a completely different department, reporting to an entirely new manager.
They isolated the variables like a scientific experiment.
Yes. Was the employee actually incapable of doing the work? Or was their previous manager an abysmal leader?
Or was the specific team dynamic inherently toxic to their working style?
Right. Or was the original task simply a catastrophic misalignment with their natural skill set? If they moved the employee to a new ecosystem and the employee suddenly thrived, which the CEO noted happened with surprising frequency, the company successfully salvaged a highly valuable asset.
And save the cost of rehiring.
If they altered all the environmental variables and the employee still failed, only then did they initiate the termination.
The secondary effects of this protocol are what make it brilliant. By publicly demonstrating this level of exhaustive effort to save an underperformer, leadership engineers an environment of immense psychological safety for the remaining workforce.
It shows they actually care.
It telegraphs to every engineer and salesperson that the company views them as a long-term capital investment, not a disposable, interchangeable cog. If you stumble, the organization's first instinct is to try to catch you and reposition you for success.
But there's a catch, right?
There is a crucial operational caveat to this process. He was absolutely adamant that when the termination finally became unavoidable, human resources was forbidden from executing the firing. The employee's direct manager had to sit in the room and own the entire uncomfortable process.
I understand the theory behind that, but let's look at the reality on the ground. If I am managing a 15-person pod, and I have an employee who is definitively dragging down our output, causing missed deadlines and frustrating the rest of the team, Why do I have to suffer through the friction of transferring them, waiting out a 6-month probationary period, and managing this exhaustive process?
You just want them gone.
Exactly. Why not just execute a clean break, cut our losses, and hire a competent replacement? Isn't that exactly what a chief broom officer should be doing? Sweeping out the dead weight.
It is a completely rational frustration, but if leadership summarily executes underperformers without an exhaustive, transparent process, you inadvertently cultivate a culture of terror.
A culture of terror.
Yes. In a culture of terror, self-preservation becomes the primary directive. Employees will begin to hide their mistakes, obscure their failures, and avoid taking calculated risks because the penalty for failure is sudden death.
And innovation dies.
Exactly. A 6-month process might cost you a slight dip in short-term productivity from one pod, but it preserves the long-term risk-taking appetite of the entire enterprise. Furthermore, the CEO's war against the forced bell curve ties perfectly into this philosophy of protecting high performers.
The forced bell curve. We have to dive into the mathematical devastation of this concept.
It is universally hated.
We all know the misery of it, but understanding exactly why it fails is critical. So the forced bell curve is a performance management system where a manager is mathematically mandated to grade a specific percentage of their team as poor, a large percentage as strictly average, and only a tiny elite fraction as excellent.
The grading is predetermined.
Right. It does not matter if you have managed to assemble a team of absolute superstars. The mathematical distribution dictates that someone at the bottom of your team must be labeled a failure and denied their bonus.
And the CEO systematically eradicated this grading methodology at Elm.
Thank goodness.
The logic he applied was unassailable. Corporations spend millions of dollars and enormous amounts of operational energy training managers to recruit and hire the absolute best talent available.
True.
If a manager succeeds in that mandate, if they curate a pod of highly driven, exceptional individuals, forcing that manager to arbitrarily degrade a portion of their superstars simply to satisfy a statistical distribution is an act of organizational self-sabotage.
It's insane when you think about it.
It destroys morale, but more perniciously, it pits employees against each other instead of focusing their energy on the external competition. If I know that helping you succeed might push me down into the mandated average tier of the curve, I am actively disincentivized from collaborating with you.
It literally breeds internal sabotage.
It does.
He brought up the mathematical dynamic of stars versus soldiers to explain the fallout.
Oh, this is a great concept.
In any given organization, the vast majority of the workforce operates as the soldiers. The reliable, consistent, average performers who execute the daily tasks and keep the operational lights on. They are essential.
You need soldiers.
You do. And then you have the stars, the rare innovators, the 10x engineers, the relentless problem solvers who drive massive asymmetrical growth.
The game changers.
Right. The CEO warned that if you attempt to flatten your reward structures to make the curve look pretty-like, if you give the reliable soldier the exact same bonus and performance rating as the transformative star, the star will instantly calculate that their extra effort yields zero return.
Why work harder for the same pay?
Exactly. They will not continue to burn themselves out for average rewards. They will simply drop their output to match the median level of the soldiers. You haven't elevated the bottom, you've merely crushed the ceiling.
And to prevent the stars from dimming their output or fleeing to competitors, Elm instituted an incredibly elegant structural solution: the technical track.
This might be my favorite policy because it solves one of the oldest, most tragic flaws in corporate history. The Peter Principle.
Oh, the Peter Principle.
The classic trap occurs when leadership identifies their absolute best, most brilliant software programmer, or their highest-grossing sales executive, and decides to reward that individual's excellence by promoting them into a management position.
It is a catastrophic misallocation of talent.
It is an absolute disaster on every conceivable level. You instantly, permanently lose the output of your best individual producer. And because managing human psychology, mediating interpersonal conflict, and balancing budgets require an entirely different skill set than writing elegant code or closing a deal, you usually gain a highly ineffective, miserable manager.
The ecosystem collapses.
The former programmer hates their life because they are stuck in one-on-one HR meetings instead of building products. The team is miserable because their new boss lacks leadership skills, and the company loses the revenue.
Everyone loses.
To short-circuit this trap, Elm built the technical track. It was a parallel ladder of advancement that allowed brilliant individual contributors to get promoted, achieve vice president level compensation, and gain executive level status and respect, without ever being forced to manage a single human being.
That is beautiful.
They could spend their entire career doing exactly what they were world-class at doing.
By decoupling financial compensation and institutional status from the specific act of people management, you retain your deep technical expertise in-house. It acknowledges that leadership is a distinct discipline, not just a reward for tenure or technical brilliance.
Exactly.
But while the company was heavily invested in retaining their stars, the CEO also issued a very sharp psychological warning to employees who might be tempted to jump ship for a larger paycheck. He spoke at length about the danger of the salary trap.
Oh, this is such a crucial piece of advice. He advised his workforce, particularly those in the early formative years of their careers, like anyone who'd been in a role for under 2 years, to guard against job hopping solely for a bump in base salary.
It's so tempting, though.
It is. And he illustrated this with a story about a specific employee. This individual was the highest performing member of his team, deeply respected by his peers, wielding significant influence and making a comfortable living.
Sounds like a great setup.
He gets headhunted by a competitor offering literally double his current salary. It seems like an absolute no-brainer, so he takes the offer.
Of course he does.
A few months later, the CEO hears that this individual is profoundly miserable in his new role. Why? Because while his bank account had doubled, he suddenly realized that in his new, highly lucrative environment, he was the least experienced, lowest paid, and lowest status person in his immediate peer group.
This phenomenon cuts straight to the core of behavioral economics and the psychology of relative deprivation.
Relative deprivation.
Yes, human beings are fundamentally comparative creatures. We do not evaluate our wealth or our happiness in an absolute vacuum. We measure it almost entirely in relation to our immediate local environment.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you are the highest performer on a team making $80,000, your brain rewards you with a constant drip of serotonin because your relative status is high. You feel successful.
You're the big fish in the small pond.
Exactly. If you leap to a new company for $160,000, but every single person sitting around your desk is making $250,000 and treating you like the junior associate, your absolute wealth has doubled, but your relative status has plummeted. Your daily lived experience becomes one of inadequacy.
You feel poor, even though you're richer.
The CEO's insight was that when evaluating an exit, you must weigh the intellectual capital, the environment, and your relative standing, because trading a high-status environment for a higher paycheck at the bottom of the totem pole is often a recipe for psychological misery.
So we have dismantled the bureaucratic scaffolding, we've empowered the pods, we've established a ruthless ethical baseline, and we've figured out how to protect our stars without turning them into terrible managers.
The machine is built and humming perfectly.
But how does the leader actually determine where to point this massive machine? How do you navigate when the market is shifting under your feet?
That brings us to the final piece of the puzzle.
The compass versus the map, and his philosophy on strategy, external consultants, and mass communication.
In traditional corporate environments, strategy is often treated as a sacred text. Executive teams will spend 6 months agonizing over a massive 100-page, 5-year strategic plan.
And then they never look at it again.
Or they print it on heavy stock paper, present it to the board, and then treat it as an immutable law. The CEO of Elm fundamentally rejected this rigidity. He viewed a strategic plan not as a topographical map to be followed blindly, but as a compass.
A compass.
A compass provides a general bearing, a true north, but it requires the traveler to continuously analyze the terrain directly in front of them and adjust their footing accordingly.
He was incredibly vocal about this with his leadership team. He explicitly ordered them not to worship the strategy.
Don't worship the strategy.
His logic was that if you write a 5-year plan in 2019 and the global market data completely shifts in 2020, clinging to the original document is suicidal. You don't just keep marching your company off a cliff simply because the map from 2 years ago promised there would be a bridge there.
And the formulation of that strategy inevitably brings up the role of outside intelligence. His relationship with management consultants was remarkably austere.
Austere is a good word for it.
In fact, he revealed that for a specific period during his tenure, he instituted a total ban on departments hiring external consultants.
A total ban.
He observed that the internal leadership was developing a dangerous dependency. They were outsourcing their critical thinking, relying on expensive external firms to make the difficult decisions so they wouldn't have to take the blame if things went wrong.
He eventually lifted the ban, but he severely restricted their usage to 3 highly specific scenarios.
Only 3.
Number 1, Acquiring global benchmarking data, essentially paying for access to raw, aggregated numbers on what competitors across the globe are doing. Number 2, securing a shocking outside perspective.
What does that mean in practice?
For example, an internal team might be so deep in the weeds that they don't realize 80% of the company's revenue is dangerously tethered to a single aging product line. A consultant can walk in, look at the books, and deliver that necessary shock to the system.
Okay, yeah.
And number 3, validating complex internal plans for the board of directors, essentially utilizing the consultant's brand name as a stamp of external risk mitigation.
But we must scrutinize the nuance he provided regarding that first point, benchmarking.
Yeah, this was interesting.
While he allowed consultants to provide benchmark data, he issued a profound warning about its application. He argued that a heavy reliance on benchmarking can actually become the mortal enemy of innovation.
That seems entirely counterintuitive to me. In the corporate world, best practices are treated as the holy grail. Why is benchmarking dangerous?
Well, best practices are intoxicating because they offer the illusion of safety. They represent a path that someone else has already cleared.
Right.
The CEO recounted a specific scenario where his team pitched a radical, unprecedented product architecture to a major client. The client reviewed the pitch, seemed intrigued, but then asked the fatal question: has anyone else in the world implemented this exact system?
Oh, no.
When the CEO proudly confirmed that this was a global first, the client physically recoiled. The client didn't want to be a pioneer. They wanted the comfort of a proven precedent.
I was scared.
The fundamental insight here is that an obsession with benchmarking, the insistence on only executing strategies that the data proves other successful companies are already doing mathematically guarantees that you will only ever be a follower.
You can never be number one.
You might become a highly optimized, very efficient follower, but you have forfeited the ability to lead the market. True, disruptive innovation requires a willingness to step entirely off the benchmarked map into the unknown.
Because you cannot benchmark a future that hasn't been invented yet.
Exactly.
And when Elm did bring consultants into the building for those specific approved tasks, the CEO instituted a brilliant operational mandate that I like to call the basement rule.
This is such a smart policy.
He had observed the standard consulting life cycle. A company hires a prestigious firm, locks their analysts in a windowless conference room in the basement for 3 months to crunch data, receives a glossy PowerPoint presentation, pays a massive invoice, and waves goodbye.
Kayla's his time.
The CEO flatly forbade this. If Elm authorized a consulting contract, the internal managers were legally required to sit in the room and work directly alongside the consultants every single day.
It transforms a vendor transaction into a forced knowledge transfer pipeline.
Yeah.
If the external consultants are building complex financial models until 10:00 p.m., the internal team is sitting right next to them until 10:00 p.m., learning the methodology. The reasoning is brilliant. When the consultants inevitably pack up their laptops and leave, taking their massive fees with them, the analytical frameworks, the data modeling skills, and the deep structural understanding of the problem remain permanently locked inside the brains of the internal workforce.
You're keeping the intellectual property.
You are not simply buying a static report. You are paying tuition to educate your own staff.
So you have this highly educated internal team, and you have a compass pointing you toward the future. The final challenge is alignment.
Keeping everyone on the same page.
Right. How do you ensure that thousands of people and dozens of autonomous pods are all looking at the same compass? His doctrine on communication was incredibly blunt. If you think you are communicating enough, you need to communicate more.
I love that quote.
To actualize this, he instituted a mandatory company-wide monthly meeting. And we are not talking about a pre-recorded video or a bulleted email newsletter. We are talking about physically pulling up to 800 employees into a space for an hour-long session every single month.
If we evaluate that decision purely through the lens of raw operational math, it appears to be an astronomically expensive investment.
The math is staggering. If you pull 800 people offline for 1 hour, that is 800 hours of entirely lost productivity.
Huge.
No code is being compiled, no client calls are being made, no bugs are being fixed. If you multiply those 800 hours by the hourly rate of high-level tech employees, that single meeting costs the company tens of thousands of dollars every time it happens. Is a glorified corporate pep rally really worth that level of capital hemorrhage?
It is remarkably easy to look at those 800 hours as a red line on a spreadsheet and label it a loss. But to understand the CEO's logic, you have to calculate the invisible ROI of transparency.
Invisible ROI.
Yes. Those 800 hours of synchronous alignment are designed to prevent tens of thousands of hours of misaligned, asynchronous work over the subsequent 30 days.
No, that makes sense.
Imagine one of those autonomous 15-person pods spending 3 weeks aggressively developing a product feature that, unbeknownst to them, no longer aligns with the CEO's subtly shifting compass.
That is a catastrophic waste of capital and morale.
Exactly. The monthly gathering is the mechanism by which the CEO calibrates the compass for the entire ecosystem simultaneously. It is the arena where he can feel the actual emotional pulse of the organization, address anxieties directly, and surgically neutralize internal rumors before they can metastasize into cultural rot.
It provides the vital bridge between cold, hard data and operational reality.
Precisely. The CEO possessed a deeply philosophical understanding of the limits of metrics. He articulated that data, by its very definition, is an artifact of the past.
It only tells you what already happened.
It can only ever tell you what happened yesterday, last quarter, or last year. But executive strategy is entirely concerned with navigating the future. A leader must utilize their intuition, an intuition honed by interacting with those 800 employees, to bridge the chasm between historical data and future reality.
Can you give an example of that failing?
Consider the tragedy of Nokia in the mid-2000s. Their executive team possessed mountains of immaculate, highly reassuring data, proving that their traditional cell phones were dominating global sales.
Everyone had a Nokia brick phone.
The data was perfect. But they fundamentally lacked the forward-looking intuition to recognize that the advent of the touchscreen smartphone was about to render their perfect data completely, irrevocably obsolete. They stared blindly at the map of the past, and they ignored the compass pointing toward the future.
What an incredible intellectual journey this has been.
Really, so much ground covered.
We've traversed a massive landscape of operational philosophy today. We began by dissecting the psychology of the exit, treating your retirement not as an escape, but as a meticulously planned deployment, requiring the construction of decompression stops to protect your mind from the shock of the void.
A vital lesson for anyone retiring.
We examined the ruthless energy economics required to guard your evenings and the necessity of shifting your life's geometry as you age. We walked through the structural mechanics of sweeping away the suffocating rot of bureaucracy, tearing down the wooden doors of hierarchy, and trusting decentralized pods to outmaneuver the market.
Scalable trust.
Exactly. We explored the deep empathy of the firing process, the mathematical imperative of dismantling the bell curve to protect your stars, and the necessity of maintaining your own intellectual sovereignty in the face of external consultants.
And to distill all of this complexity down to its essence, whether you are navigating the transition out of a career, managing a 15-person pod, or simply trying to optimize the trajectory of your own life, the foundational truth is that leadership is not a title.
No, it isn't.
It is an active, relentless daily practice. It requires the intellectual courage to stare unblinkingly at the cold data. But it demands the deeper wisdom to recognize when those metrics are tethering you to a world that simply no longer exists.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over a challenge directly inspired by the architecture we've just unpacked.
Take a hard look at your own professional or personal landscape right at this exact moment.
Are you quietly worshiping a 5-year strategy that you wrote for yourself half a decade ago? A plan that simply no longer aligns with the person you have evolved into today?
Are you desperately clinging to a benchmarked map when the very ground beneath you is shifting?
Or worse, are you sitting in your own life waiting for some external authority to give you permission to try something entirely unprecedented simply because you are terrified that no one else has ever done it before?
Don't wait for permission.
Exactly. If the architecture of your current reality is feeling a little suffocating, maybe it is time to stop waiting for the perfect data to arrive. Grab the broom and start sweeping.